guys, BBI here. I want to stop and say thanks for tuning in and checking out whatever the video is about that's about ready to come up next. If you could take a minute and hit subscribe, I'd greatly appreciate it. And if you enjoy what you've seen here, make sure to hit the like button. We'd greatly appreciate your support. Anyhow, guys, all that aside, let's get on with the show. Gentlemen and ladies, all amongst you, I had an interesting thing happen today. There's an amp technician that's out there that is trying to find himself a transistor checker that is like mine. For some reason, he's trying to follow in my footsteps. And I haven't had enough time to get with him, but I have another friend of mine that is a mutual associate, and he asked me the question of what kind of bulb does this specific antique transistor tester take? And it made me think, wow, there's been a huge progression of transistor testers in my lifetime. No joke. So in the beginning, when I was 12 or 13 years old, and I was just trying to get my head wrapped around some of this stuff, the old man taught me how to use this. And you can use any, the meter I had at that time was a BNK, or not BNK, B&M. It was like a dark gray with green lettering on it. It was like a $400 or $500 meter that I'd borrowed from somebody. That was my very first voltmeter that I had that wasn't analog. And that's what I learned how to check transistors with, by using the diode and a resistor function. It is very common. So I thought, well, I want to go out and I want to do a video of all the different little transistor testers that I have laying around out here. I kind of collect these things. The only one I can't find that I would normally or could use is a little gray one that I got from Baker Man. And I, for the life of me, in this myriad of crap out here in my shop, I cannot find it. But I started here, and this is really simple. You guys can go Google on the old Googler finder there, the porn finder. How to test a transistor with a voltometer. Pretty straightforward. Requires a piece of paper and about 2 seconds worth of thinking. But then I ended up running into another guy. His name was Mike Cope. And Mike Cope gave me this tester here. This is my very first absolute transistor checker, and I've carried this with me my entire life. I got this when I was 13. He gave this to me, I think, as a birthday present or a Christmas present. It was in December sometime. He'd found this in his myriad shed. He lived in a single wide trailer literally down by the river in this little town called Garden City, which Boise encapsulates. And he was like the troll that lived underneath the bridge, literally. Right next to his house was a big bridge they just built, and he lived right there. And in his trailer was just floor-to-ceiling radio stuff, and that was his entire existence, was radio. And he had this CB shop at the local truck stop that was here, and I remember I went to go see him one time, and the sign said open, and there was a slit just big enough for like a 148 to slide through, and you had to talk to him through that slit. He didn't want to meet you. He didn't care what you looked like. Didn't slide it through the slot, fill out the paper, and I'll call you. He was old Mike Cope. He was an interesting individual. Anyhow, he wrote this note out for me that's on the back. He says, here, follow this note. When you hook up your leads, at least when it comes to the TEO or TE case transistors that we're all used to using in the amplifier portion of things, he goes, that'll get you figured out what a collector, emitter, and the bases are. And I said, what about this other switch that says NPN and PNP? He goes, you'll figure it out. You know, I had no idea that stood for negative, positive, negative, or positive, negative, positive. The lamp turns on and off. This runs on a single D-cell battery. I don't think I've ever changed the D-cell battery in this thing since I was 13. Let that sink in for a hot minute. This has got a single neon bulb in it. It's a GE bulb. I'm afraid to take this thing out. This is pretty old and delicate. This lens is pretty hard to find too. I know there's a couple floating around on the inner boob right now. This is uses a neon. This looks like a regular little incandescent bulb, but it's not. There's two neon electrodes that are in this thing, and one will light up for PNP and the other one will light up for NPN. I'm not going to lie, this spends most of its time in the PNP position, obviously. So this is a GE NE51, and there's different variants of this. So then we go forward in this world. Like, this was my first legitimate transistor checker that I could check gain on it. I'll show you how this works here real quick, and then we'll move on. I just thought it'd be fun for you guys to see all my transistor checkers, because I take this real serious. The ability to look at a transistor's function, at least in my universe for what I do, the very basic old school electronics that I do, is very scooching important. Let me zoom on in down here, and we'll see if we can catch this sucker in motion here. That'll work. So we're going to test a PNP transistor. We're going to turn on the lamp. We're going to hook up our collector. We're going to hook up our base. And then we always hook up our emitter last. The transistor is no good. Maybe I'll grab another one out of the used bin pile here. There we go. Okay. So you'll see that little flutter. I've come to read this thing. You'll see that this little secondary lens will flutter the little lamp. I've come to read this thing more like a Bible, like a Christian would read a Bible. I got really good at understanding the different characteristics of what this little neon bulb was trying to tell me. So, believe it or not, that's still lit, still lit, still lit. Now it's off. So that tells me that my gain on this thing is roughly about 29. Okay, so the beta gain on this thing is roughly about a 29. Now when we get down here towards the bottom, when the beta gains start getting, like if I was to reach up and pull these transistors off the wall that I bought from X-Force, these here, way back when, we're talking 7 years ago, these would read on the beta gain chart, they're technically still, quote, good, but they read all the way down here at 1 is where the bulb is the strongest, but both of the poles of the transistor flicker. Okay. Now there's a funny story that goes on with those transistors on the wall. I bought those off eBay because I heard a rumor what he was doing is he would get like 1,000 transistors in from Haigu, and then he'd go through and he'd beta test all of them. And anything that had a beta gain below 5, which we all know is the death nail for the transistor, it's on his slow way to the grave. Well, he was offloading all those transistors underneath a username on Facebook, so I went, or on eBay. So I got on eBay and I found myself the only dealer that was in Illinois, Mundum, Illinois, or whatever the hell he's from, and bought 2. And I paid like $63 for 2 of those. And I showed up, and they showed up, and I came out here and I checked them with my transistor checker, and they came up as having a gain as 1. Not this particular transistor tester, another one that I'm going to come to. And so then I went and I messaged him about it. Well, I didn't know for sure that who I had bought the transistors from was X-Force until about a week later. And so he issued me a return, and I thought, no, I'm not going to do a return. I'm going to just put these up on my wall as a reminder to myself and everybody else that, well, times have changed. We had the best company in the world all of a sudden was not. And I was just shocked with that. Later, come to find out what he was waiting to do is to get the transistors back and then he was going to build an amp with them just to prove a point that, you know, I didn't know what I was talking about. As soon as he saw the transistors up on the wall, he went up and he did that video, testing transistors with a gain of 1. So he slams the 2 transistors in there that have gains, beta gains of 1, and then puts the amp into continuous operation. The thing he didn't show was that the amp continued working, which it would not, and it was only working into a dummy load, because if it worked into anything else, the transistors would have collapsed and smoked into little pieces. I never fill in those holes. I just go on with my business, and I don't worry about other things like that. So that's what happens when both sides of the neon bulb light up. They're trying to tell you that the transistor's right at the edge of its total gain collapse, and it's going to have full leakage across the base or the collector or the emitter. This is my second transistor tester that I ever received, made by Olson. Didn't see a lot of use. This has a very straightforward, I don't know if I got batteries in this thing or not. I don't. I'm not going to even bother messing with it. Very straightforward. Instead of having a knob or any kind of usable variable interface, it just gives you an HFE breakdown. So that's where I sat for 15, 16 years. Was at those 3 different levels of devices. And then I decided I'd get back into radio again. This little tin will look familiar to the guy that sold me this tester. I bought this on the side of the road off a truck driver who used to be a friend of mine. He ended up talking more shit and smack and stirring the pot than it was really worth, and had to let him go as a friend. I've had to do that quite a bit growing up in this business. You have people that show up and they act like they want to be your friend, but really what they're more interested in doing is starting shit or talking shit about you, or trying to act like they're involved when they're really not, and entering their opinions in it. And it causes more drama and pain and hurt than it's worth. So every time somebody starts to act like that around me, they immediately just get exiled from my life. I can't have that. I can't have that. But anyhow, I bought this from him. When I came back to the radio world, we started screwing around with FETs, RF520s. That was like new to all of us out here, and that should date this, right? Well, we wanted to find a transistor checker that allowed us to check MOSFET transistors. And the running urban legend in the radio community around here was that FETs were incredibly hard to test, and the machines to test them were incredibly expensive. Well, we went out and did an internet search like that day, and this is back when you had to get on the computer, go to like AOL.com, type in your freaking password, and then beep, boop, beep, I mean dial up, right? Okay. That's when I came across this. This was the Atlas DCA55. This is a great tester. I still have a battery in this, and I maintain it even though it's like 10-year, 15-year-old technology. Used the crap out of this. Actually wore the leads off of this a couple times to where I broke the leads off. This thing was mind-bending to me that somebody had bothered to build something like this. It was only, at the time, it was like $100 or like $130. And I bought this to prove a point that we could actually test these cheap, 2-cent a piece MOSFETs that were blowing up like cotton candy. And I wanted to start understanding how to build a FET amplifier. So to build one, you have to buy the equipment to be able to test it, and this is where I started, was with this little tester. He had purchased this on his own, and then he decided he didn't want it and offered it to me for sale, and I said sure. I had like $100 in my pocket, and I met him on the side of the interstate at like milepost 67 or 68 or some shit on the side of the road between here and Mountain Home, Idaho, and bought this from him, and used this for a long time. Well, at the time, I was interested in MOBETA technology. All right, so we're gonna set this aside. Well, not too long after that, Atlas came out with this tester here, which you guys have all come to see on video quite an awful lot. This is the Atlas DCA75 Pro. The 75 Pro looks an awful lot like the 55 Pro. This uses a battery that is closer to the construct of a garage door battery. It's a 3.5 volt battery. This uses a AAA. So I'd love to be able to tell you that the internal architecture of the two devices are the same. They are not. This USB port that is on the top allows us to plug into a computer and allows us to have a very good, somewhat reliable, but at low voltage, low amperage leak tester and load tester for the transistor with software that is free from their company. I first started using these, and then it seemed like to me, at least from my point of view, and I'm sure this isn't factual in any way, but at least from my point of view, the instant I started using this DC55 on camera, all of a sudden everybody had to have one. Okay. Then I went out and I got the DCA75, which was like $200 at the time. I was so excited that I could finally afford to do that. And then all of a sudden everybody and their brother had one. So I just thought it was kind of interesting. Found it's easier to store these things just in their original cardboard. So I just keep them in their package. When I bought this one, it was in this little blue, like had little sticker print on it, with little dog prints and stuff on it, and I can't handle that. It was like a Christmas tin of some kind, so I painted it black. It'd be a little bit more manly. So then the game started. And the game was I wanted to have more transistor testers because I started collecting them. Now, I'm going to poo-poo on that urban legend here in a minute. This is a Pnp Precision 520 transistor tester. This thing's really neat. It doesn't matter how you go about hooking the leads up. Sounds a lot like this one. And it beeps at you. It gives you an LED indication. You can do a leak and an identification test. This one runs on 110 volts. And by moving this through the different symbols of base, collector, emitter, well, if you think about it, if you've got 3 leads, you've got a total of 9 different positions those 3 leads can be in, period, on a 3-legged device. So you just basically turn this on, hook up your 3 leads and move this through. Eventually one of the LEDs will light up, and that allows you to start moving through the different tests. And it'll beep at you when you get the proper conductivity going on. Very basic. Gives us a leak test and allows us to identify what the component is. This is a neat little beginner's transistor tester. Makes it very simplistic and easy. So then this little guy came along. My friend Zane at Big Rig Radio found that one for me. This little guy came along. Now, remember, the urban legend around here was to test MOSFETs. It took thousands and thousands of dollars of test equipment and to accurately test them. That is not the case. This is the BNK model 162 transistor FET tester. Okay. This is the side you go to for FETs. This is the side you go to for transistors. I leave this in the off position. When I got this, I had to build leads for it, completely recap it, and I had a couple of resistors that were bad. Also had to replace all the battery terminals on the inside, but it looked fairly clean when we bought it, but there was a lot of problems inside. This is fully functional and works. This allows me to test up to 1 amp worth of current, okay, on the transistor. Now we found, when we started working with North, the people that he'd been dealing with up to that point had only the ability to test with like an Atlas DCA75, something that it can only test with about 500 milliamps worth of current. So I went, and I'm not going to go drag it out, but I went out and I got myself the Tektronix gain slope tester that he has. It's a very rudimentary 1970s monochromatic screen, but it allows us to do one thing. It allows us to go to 50 amps on the transistor underneath operational load. Transistor only pulls about 25 amps, so therefore, with the transistor underneath fully load, your beta numbers change. Your HFE numbers change. Well, my thing has always been with the Toshiba, if I can put it on my Atlas DCA 75, and it shows me that I've got a gain of 100, with a AAA battery, why do I need to go and hook up 50 amps worth of operational current on the transistor to get the gain numbers the same? I'm not going to argue with that. I don't care. I went out and I bought that transistor tester. It lives in my guest bedroom. I don't bother bringing it all the way out here in the shop because I don't have room for the antique thing. Now, let's talk about this horse penis. My friend Zane, once again at Big Rig Radio, found this in Arizona. Some nice gentleman sold this to him, and it is fully functional. This is a badass piece of equipment. This old girl, which I went out and I downloaded the manual for because I needed to understand how to operate it, allows us to do up to 100 amps worth of current on the transistor. I currently have this set up for a HG configuration, and I currently have this in the 30 amp position. In the short position, it allows us to do a collector input of up to 100 amps, and so on and so on. How this tester works is you take your transistor and you bolt it to your heatsink. Then you hook up your accompanying leads and go to moving your dials. If you're interested in finding out how this works even further, please feel free to download the manual for it. This thing is an amazing piece of equipment. This thing was made in 1963. And I love old school technology like this. As you open it, you can smell the vintage electronics gassing off. I love it. It smells like old America when things were made here and things were made well and with quality and to a repeatable standard. Something that has been lost on America since we've now bent over and given our anal cavities to China, which is inevitable. This is made by Triplite, and that's T-R-I-P-L-E-T-T. Triple plot. This is a neat tester. I put so much current on an HG one time. The top popped off. It went smoking past my head as it was sitting down here in the test jig. And the way I have this set up is that these two tongs actually make contact with the eyelets of the transistor and hold it down. Because the transistor, you start loading it up on current, it starts to produce heat. If I wanted to, doing a series of tests over time, I could probably chart out the exact same amount of data that I get from that curve tracer, which is huge. The difference is this is a several $100 device, like $400 or $500, if you can find one good, and I've seen them on eBay for way less than that, but I don't know if they're working or not. This one was working. I didn't have to do anything to it, turn it on and go. I was more concerned that the lights would not work. They do. I love this transistor tester. You give me a transistor, I can take it to its absolute limit. The reason the 100 amps is really good is because it allows me to fully saturate and test voltage regulator transistors for like power supplies and so on. But this manual reads like it was written in the 60s. In general, the DC beta measurement correctly closed with the AC measurements on power transistors therefore are AC readings on power types and are little or no importance and are difficult to undertake. However, on low current signal types, HFE tends to depart in the value from the HFE, and the AC readings take on a real significance. You can get confused really fast. It took me a little while to understand how to operate this. I think I read this manual about 4 or 5 times. I'm one of those people that want to read something, I have to read it once, then read it twice, then read it third or fourth time, and then it starts to make sense, and then it starts to stick, and then I'm able to retain it. But I'm not going to lie, about 4 or 5 HG transistors met their death on this machine until I understood how to run it. Let that sink in for a minute. None of us are born knowing everything. None of us know how to do anything when we're born. And so we have to find somebody that's willing to teach us, or we have to learn it from a book, or we have to get it off the internet, or we have to watch a YouTube video. Okay? So on something like this, unless I knew somebody in the 60s that knew specifically how to use this piece of test equipment, I'm stuck reading this because the obscure information on some of this old equipment is almost impossible to find. Thank God there's somebody out there that is dedicated enough and gives a shit enough about vintage electronics that was willing to find that manual, put it in a PDF format, and make it out there so it was Google searchable, so we'd be able to find it and explore this and exploit the same technology ourselves in 2020, 2019. This is my favorite transistor tester of them all. There is no data, as far as I'm concerned, that I can not get from this that any of these other devices allow me to achieve. I basically want to find out what its leaking is, what the gain of the device is, and if it works when it comes to amateur amplifiers or CB amplifiers. So the rest of this is just sugar coating. The reason I had to go out and buy the big Tektronix tester is because I had to validate the data. It's like when these transistors come in for evaluation, he's looking for a specific set of data points to come back from me, and he's looking for validation. Like here's the latest set of lot that he sent me. 2879C 19X7s. Right here. He sent me 4 or 5 pieces. I test them. I usually build a very hyper mono channeled amplifier with it. So, and when I mean channel, I mean like mono frequency. Once you go about 5 or 6 kcs away from where that amplifier is tuned from, which is all a pure induction transistor tester basically, it's just 100% induction. There's no transformers in that. Just use a couple capacitors and 2 induction coils and 2 capacitors. Make a mono frequency transistor tester, basically a mono frequency amplifier, single-ended by the way, and then I'll max saturate the thing in operation and then give him the data points of input signal versus output signal, maximum carrier, maximum saturation underneath modulation, and maximum current load, and all of those phases of angles. But then I can go and do a leak down test. After I do that, I can present him with the data of a leak down test. And once we got to that point, that's when we started seeing components that were worth a little bit more than what the DEI legendary parts were. So, anywho, that's that. I just thought you guys would enjoy seeing my transistor collection, tester collection, and I got other stuff I got to do. Gentlemen, have a good night. See ya. Bye.